General Lionel Braxton thought he'd just stop for gas. But when two officers treated him like a suspect instead of a hero, they had no idea the Pentagon was listening live. It was a warm Thursday afternoon in Dinwiddie County, Virginia. The kind of day where the heat settles into your skin and everything moves a little slower. General Lionel Braxton had just wrapped up a quiet lunch with an old friend from Fort Lee. At 67, Braxton had the look of someone who'd lived through storms, both on the battlefield and behind closed doors in Washington. But none of that mattered the moment he pulled into the Fillmore Gas and Go off Interstate 85. He was driving a beige Nissan Altima. Rental. Nothing flashy. Just a reliable car for a short visit down south. He wore a navy polo tucked into khakis and scuffed loafers, the kind you slip into when you're off duty and not expecting to be noticed. But as he stepped out and reached for the gas pump, he noticed a patrol car slow down as it passed the lot entrance. Then it turned around. "Here we go," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Braxton wasn't a man prone to paranoia, but he could tell when something was off. The cruiser parked across the lot and didn't move for nearly a minute. Two white officers inside, both watching him. No gas, no coffee, just eyes. Then the doors opened. Officer Blake Tressler, late 30s, stocky, shaved head, approached with his hand resting on his holster. His partner, Officer Colin Rayburn, younger, lanky, trailing a few steps behind. Their pace wasn't rushed, but it wasn't casual either. "Sir," Tressler began, "can you step away from the vehicle for a moment?" Braxton stayed calm. "Is something wrong?" "We got a call about a suspicious vehicle. You match the description." Braxton raised an eyebrow. "A beige Altima. At a gas station." Rayburn shifted nervously. "It's more about the individual, sir. You match the report." Braxton didn't flinch. "I'm a retired 4-star general in the U.S. Army. My name is Lionel Braxton. I've just come from Fort Lee. I can show you my ID." He reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. A crisp official military ID and a retired officer's license fell open. Tressler glanced at it, but didn't take it. "I'll need you to step to the side of the vehicle," he said again, this time firmer. Braxton sighed, not out of fear, but frustration. "You have my ID. You can call this in. It'll take 30 seconds. Rayburn gave a quick glance to Tressler, waiting for the go-ahead. But Tressler already made up his mind. "We're not doing this here, sir. Step away from the vehicle now." At this point, Braxton's phone buzzed in his hand. A scheduled call with a liaison at the Pentagon was coming through. He answered it, turned the speaker on, and kept his hands visible. "Braxton here. Stand by," he said, his voice calm but strained. Tressler's patience snapped. "That's it. Hands on the car. Now!" Braxton didn't move. "You're making a mistake." Rayburn reached for his cuffs. "Sir, we're not going to ask again." And just like that, it happened. Two officers, guns holstered but hands aggressive, shoved a retired general against the warm metal of a rental car. Knees scraped, shoulder twisted, cuffs clinked shut. The phone slipped from Braxton's hand onto the pavement. Still on the call. General Braxton?" The voice on the line repeated. Faint but audible. Tressler didn't notice. Rayburn did, but ignored it. "You're being detained," Tressler said. "You'll answer questions downtown." "For what?" "Being black at pump number 4? Braxton said, his voice even, but bitter. Tressler didn't respond. He looked annoyed. Rayburn looked uncertain. They pulled him toward the cruiser, but the voice still coming from the phone was already moving, fast, urgent, and headed straight into a situation bigger than either officer could imagine. In Washington, D.C., 30 miles from the gas station, Lieutenant Commander Sheila Franks was sitting at her desk in the E-ring of the Pentagon when her voice echoed through Lionel Braxton's fallen phone. "General Braxton, can you hear me?" "Sir?" She leaned forward, straining to make out the muffled sounds on the line. Her eyes narrowed as she heard scuffling. A man's voice yelling commands, and then Braxton's voice, calm but sharp, cutting through the chaos. Something was wrong. Dead wrong. She didn't hang up. She hit a button on her secure desk phone and patched in her supervisor. I think General Braxton's in some kind of trouble. I'm still on the call. On the other end of the line, Colonel Derek Paley sat up straighter. Location? Phone says Petersburg, Virginia, near Route 460. Paley didn't wait. Get me military liaison services and a patch to the Virginia State Police, now! Back at the gas station, Officer Tressler was writing something down on a clipboard. Rayburn kept shifting his weight, glancing at Braxton in the back seat, like he was beginning to realize this wasn't going to end the way he thought. Braxton hadn't said a word since being put into the cruiser. Not a plea, not a protest. He just sat there, hands cuffed behind his back, staring straight ahead. The tension was building, but nobody knew how close the fuse was to blowing. Down the street, a young woman named Jada Pennington watched from her car parked beside the convenience store. She had started filming when she saw the officers manhandle Braxton, and by now the video had hit Twitter. The caption read, "2 cops arresting an old black man who literally said he was a general?" The video was already getting traction. Commenters were tagging news outlets, civil rights lawyers, and anyone who might care. At the county dispatch center, a dispatcher named Troy McMillan picked up a strange call. "This is Colonel Paley from the Pentagon. I need to confirm whether 2 of your officers are detaining General Lionel Braxton at a gas station off 85. Troy blinked, paused, and glanced at the call log. We did have a suspicious vehicle stop reported a few minutes ago. Beige Altima, right?" "Yes," Paley said. "Get me your supervisor, now." Within 10 minutes, Dinwiddie County's Sheriff Alan Gerber was on the phone being told, in very clear terms, that he had 2 deputies detaining a decorated general whose credentials were already known at the federal level. Gerber's tone shifted immediately. "We'll handle it." But back in the cruiser, time was crawling. Braxton knew better than to speak too soon. His silence wasn't weakness. It was control. It was knowing that a man's words can be used against him, especially when the people holding the cuffs think they're in charge. Officer Rayburn finally opened the door. He avoided Braxton's eyes. Sir, I need to ask, that ID you showed, was that real?" Braxton slowly turned his head, finally looking Rayburn in the eye. "You want to ask me that now?" Rayburn looked like he might be sick. He closed the door again, stepped away, and whispered to Tressler. Their exchange was heated. Tressler kept shaking his head. Rayburn pointed toward the car. That's when a black SUV pulled into the lot at a fast clip. 2 men in suits stepped out, both from military liaison services. One flashed a badge. "Who's in charge here?" Tressler straightened up. "I am. Officer Tressler." The taller man spoke first. "You have a federal problem. That man in your car is General Lionel Braxton. Your body cams better be running." Tressler stuttered. We were just following up on a call." Braxton was let out of the car without apology. His wrists were red, his expression unreadable. The man in the suit leaned close to Tressler. "You have any idea how bad you just messed up?" Braxton looked at Rayburn, then at Tressler. "I gave you my name," he said simply. Rayburn opened his mouth, but nothing came out. But it wasn't just the officers who were scrambling. Word of the incident was already making its way up political channels, and the Pentagon wasn't the only institution watching anymore. By the time General Braxton was released from the cruiser, his wrists were already bruising. He didn't ask for an apology. He didn't threaten a lawsuit. He just picked up his phone, glanced at the cracked screen, and saw 23 missed calls. Most from numbers only a man in his position would recognize. Some local, some federal. One directly from a 3-star general at the Pentagon. Back inside the black SUV, Braxton didn't say much to the agents who had come to extract him. He simply asked to speak with Lieutenant Commander Sheila Franks. The phone was handed to him without delay. "Sheila?" "Sir, I've already briefed Colonel Paley. State Police and Internal Affairs have been notified." Braxton let out a long breath. Not relief, more like restraint. "Make sure they know I cooperated. Every step. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resist. This wasn't just a mistake." Franks hesitated. "Understood." The SUV pulled away from the gas station, leaving Tressler and Rayburn under a storm that hadn't even begun yet. Rayburn leaned against the cruiser, hands on his hips. Tressler just stared at the exit ramp, jaw tight. Within the hour, Virginia's governor had been briefed. The Secretary of Defense was looped in. By the time Braxton returned to his hotel in Petersburg, his name was already trending nationwide. Not for a new speech, not for his work with veterans, but because a black retired general was handcuffed like a nobody, just miles from a military base he once commanded. The Pentagon's legal team called for all body cam footage, dispatch transcripts, and incident reports. No stone left untouched. And then came the question that made everyone shift in their seats. Why wasn't the ID verified on the spot? Back at the Dinwiddie County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Gerber stood before a room of tense faces. Reporters had already begun circling. An officer from dispatch handed him the Pentagon's official inquiry letter. The heading alone was enough to break a sweat. The press conference was short and uncomfortable. Gerber tried to call it a procedural failure, but nobody was buying it. Especially not Braxton, who watched the whole thing from his hotel room with the TV on mute. He didn't need the sound. He knew how it played. That night, Colonel Paley met with the Chief of Staff and other high-ranking officials. "We need to be careful how we handle this," someone in the room said. "He's a symbol, whether we like it or not." "He's a man," Paley replied. "One who served this country more than half the people in this building. What's he want?" Another voice asked. Paley paused. He hasn't said yet, but General Braxton knew exactly what he wanted. He didn't want heads to roll. Not yet. What he wanted was acknowledgement, not just of who he was, but of how quickly that was erased the moment two officers decided he didn't belong at a gas pump. The next morning, a formal investigation was announced. It wasn't just internal, it was federal. Independent oversight, military liaisons, civilian board members. Everyone wanted transparency, or at least the appearance of it. In Alexandria, Congressman Louis Berryman, a former Marine turned politician, gave a fiery statement on the House floor. "If this can happen to General Lionel Braxton, it can happen to anyone. And don't tell me this was just a miscommunication. This was a failure of judgment, tinted by the worst kind of bias." Braxton, once silent, was slowly becoming a national symbol again. This time, not for his battlefield strategy, but for how a country fails even its own when the uniform is no longer visible. But while the Pentagon's machinery moved with precision, the real storm was forming in the court of public opinion, where reputations don't just fall, they collapse. 2 days after the incident, Officer Colin Rayburn couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed in his small apartment in Colonial Heights, shirtless, staring at the carpet, phone screen glowing beside him. Every headline had his name in it. Every comment section was a fresh wound. His girlfriend had stopped answering his texts. His mother told him not to come over for dinner until things had settled down. He knew it wouldn't. Not anytime soon. He had tried to explain it to her. "I didn't know who he was. I was following Tressler's lead." But the truth clung to him. He had looked at the ID. He had heard the man's name, and he had chosen to ignore it. Tressler, meanwhile, was holding his ground. In the locker room at the Dinwiddie County Sheriff's Office, he slammed his locker shut and muttered to the guys on the shift change, "All this over one old man who wouldn't comply." The room went quiet. Deputy Lionel Soto, a soft-spoken vet with 15 years on the force, didn't say anything to Tressler. But he did text the captain later that night. "You might want to look at Tressler's body cam before the media does." The footage from the incident told a very different story than the official report. Tressler's language had been aggressive from the start. Braxton's ID had been clearly visible. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't even moved quickly. And yet the narrative in the report had been skewed. Phrases like "failure to comply" and "possible resistance" painted a picture that didn't hold up. By Monday morning, both officers were placed on administrative leave. Rayburn sat through his internal interview and barely made it through without breaking down. He admitted he didn't trust his partner's judgment, but didn't feel he could challenge him in the moment. The sheriff's tone had changed drastically from a few days ago. Now he was nervous. Now he used words like disappointed and deeply concerned. He issued a public apology, but it was too little, too late. Outside the sheriff's office, protesters began to gather. Some were locals, veterans, students. Others had driven hours. Their signs were blunt. Respect isn't optional. Handcuff one, shame all. If a general can get cuffed, who's next? General Braxton still hadn't made a formal public statement. He had offers from every news outlet imaginable. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. He declined all of them, not out of fear, out of principle. He wasn't ready to speak until it meant something. Instead, he made a quiet visit to the local VA hospital. No cameras, no announcement, just a walk through the halls to check on wounded veterans, a reminder to himself that service isn't always loud. Meanwhile, the Dinwiddie Board of Supervisors held an emergency session. The sheriff was grilled for 2 hours. Why wasn't the ID verified? Why weren't the officers trained to recognize military credentials? Why did they ignore protocol? One of the board members, Lillian Brody, said it best. This isn't about bad apples. It's about a broken process that rewards certainty over curiosity. Those officers chose not to listen, and that choice has consequences. Rayburn watched the hearing from home, eyes red. He wasn't angry at her. She was right. Later that evening, he typed out a message in his notes app. He didn't know if he'd ever send it. To General Braxton, I was wrong. I let someone else's certainty override my instinct. You didn't deserve that. I hope one day I can look you in the eye and say that in person. But he didn't hit send. Not yet. But while the department was trying to manage the damage, the world outside had already turned this into something bigger, a moment that no press release could undo. The following Thursday, General Lionel Braxton walked up the marble steps of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Not for a tour, not for a ceremony, but for a press conference, his first and only public statement since the incident. He didn't come alone. Flanked by 2 fellow retired generals and a Navy SEAL turned congressman, Braxton stood beneath a canopy of microphones, hands steady, expression hard to read. Let me be clear, he began. This isn't about me. This is about recognition, not medals or salutes. Recognition of a person's humanity, regardless of what they're wearing or what they drive. Every major news network had cameras on him. A few feet away, civil rights leader Dr. Henrietta Marks nodded slowly as he continued. I've worn the uniform of this country for 4 decades. I've walked through war zones. I've negotiated in rooms most people never see. But a few days ago I was reduced to suspicious, not for what I did, but for what I looked like at a gas station. His voice didn't shake. He wasn't interested in theatrics. He didn't need volume to command attention. This country gave me every opportunity to rise, but it also gave 2 undertrained officers the confidence to ignore everything I am. That should bother every American, uniformed or not. The crowd applauded. Reporters shouted questions. Braxton held up a hand. I'm not here for political theater. I'm here because this has to mean something. Let this be the last time someone has to list their resume just to be seen. Back in Dinwiddie County, the sheriff watched the statement on a break room TV. He didn't say a word. Officer Rayburn sat in his apartment, replaying the live stream, the pit in his stomach growing with every sentence. And across the country, conversations exploded. In classrooms, in office buildings, at dinner tables, on local news segments. Not just about racism, not just about policing, but about assumption. About how quickly we decide who someone is based on what we think we know. Community organizers in Richmond planned a town hall, not a protest. A conversation. It filled up within hours. Local teachers brought students. A group of veterans came in uniform. Everyone wanted to speak, to be heard. Braxton didn't attend. He didn't have to. His story was in the room already. Meanwhile, the Dinwiddie County Sheriff's Office released the bodycam footage to the public. It wasn't edited, no redactions. It showed exactly what happened. The footage went viral. The backlash hit hard. Tressler was suspended indefinitely pending review of past conduct. Old complaints began to resurface. Some dismissed, some never taken seriously. Rayburn was summoned again for a second interview, this time with federal oversight present. But something unexpected began happening. Veterans across the country, black, white, Latino, Asian, started sharing their own stories. Times they were ignored, times they were disrespected, times they were mistaken for someone else the moment the uniform was off. It wasn't just General Braxton anymore. He had opened a floodgate. In Detroit, a Marine veteran named Sheila Boone started a campaign called Beyond the Badge, focused on retraining law enforcement officers on how to handle military IDs and recognize military service. Donations poured in. Departments reached out. People wanted change. And now, they had a face behind it. Braxton never asked for the spotlight, but he didn't run from it either. At his next closed-door meeting with military leadership, someone asked if he wanted to push for a disciplinary action against the officers. "I want better systems," he replied. "I want no man or woman in uniform to have to explain their worth ever again." But while national support surged, a private conversation was about to take place, one that would test everything Braxton believed about forgiveness, justice, and power. The invitation came quietly. No press, no noise, just a formal letter from the Office of Commonwealth's Attorney requesting General Braxton's presence at a disciplinary hearing tied to the incident. The officers wouldn't be present. Yet. This was preliminary. But Braxton knew it wouldn't end there. A week later, in a modest government building in Chesterfield, he sat at a table across from a panel of 5 lawyers, civilian liaisons, a representative from the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. Everyone looked stiff, careful with their words. "General," the lead chair began, "we want to thank you again for your composure and cooperation. Today, we'll be reviewing the full scope of the events, and we'd appreciate your personal recommendation regarding disciplinary actions." Braxton leaned back in his chair. He took a moment before responding. "I didn't come here to ruin lives," he said. "But I also didn't come here to let this slide." The panel nodded, relieved and unsure at the same time. Later that day, a private meeting was arranged between Braxton and the 2 officers. It wasn't a courtroom, and it wasn't on camera. Just a neutral room inside the county's administrative building. Officer Rayburn entered first, hat in hand, eyes low. He looked like he hadn't slept since the incident. Tressler followed, defiant even now, but quieter than usual. Braxton sat still, hands folded. The silence was heavy. Rayburn was the first to speak. "Sir, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I knew better. I didn't stop it. I didn't stand up when I should have." Braxton didn't answer right away. He studied the younger man for a long moment. "You ever serve?" he asked. Rayburn shook his head. "No, sir." "Then maybe that's part of the problem." Rayburn swallowed hard. "I should have seen you as a person, not as a problem to solve." Braxton nodded once, then turned to Tressler. Tressler didn't speak. "You had a choice," Braxton said. "Every step of that encounter, you had a choice. And you chose arrogance over inquiry. You chose control over communication." "I was doing my job," Tressler finally said, though his voice didn't carry the same conviction it had at the gas station. "No," Braxton replied calmly. "You were doing your version of the job. One that said my skin and my car were more urgent than my words or my ID." Tressler looked away. Braxton took a deep breath and stood up. "I'm not interested in seeing either of you behind bars. That doesn't make me safer. What I want is for this to mean something. I want retraining for every officer in this county. I want cultural literacy. And I want one more thing," he paused. "I want both of you to stand in front of your fellow officers and tell them exactly what you did wrong." Rayburn nodded immediately. Tressler said nothing, but didn't walk out. The meeting ended without handshakes. Braxton left the room feeling lighter, not because justice had been done, but because something had shifted. He'd spoken truth to the very system that tried to erase him. 2 weeks later, both officers stood in front of the department during a mandatory training session. Rayburn read a full statement, voice trembling but clear. Tressler spoke next. His words were shorter, stiffer, but they were his. He admitted he didn't listen, admitted he ignored the ID, admitted he treated a man like a suspect instead of a citizen. And for the first time in his career, he looked unsure. The department instituted changes, required identification protocol reviews, implicit bias training, quarterly reviews tied directly to community feedback. Braxton didn't show up for any of those sessions. He didn't need to. His presence had already changed the room, even when he wasn't in it. But before this story could end, there was one more thing he needed to say. This time, not to a panel, or officers, or reporters, but to the public. General Lionel Braxton sat alone in his study back home in Alexandria, Virginia. The sun was setting through the wide windows, casting long shadows across the framed photographs on the wall. In one, he stood in full uniform, flanked by young soldiers in Afghanistan. In another, he held a folded flag at a burial in Arlington. But the one he stared at now was different. Just him. No medals. No hat. No posture. Just a man at a podium. Captured the moment he said, "Let this be the last time someone has to list their resume just to be seen." He hadn't planned to speak again. But sometimes the silence becomes part of the problem. So, a few weeks after the hearing, he recorded a message from his home. No press, no production crew. Just a single camera and his voice. "When I was a boy," he began, "my grandfather told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'One day you'll wear something that tells the world who you are. But what matters more is how they treat you when you take it off.'" He looked directly into the lens, pausing. "I earned respect in this country the long way. Through combat, through leadership, through sacrifice. But it shouldn't take 4 stars and a war record to be treated like a human being at a gas station." He rested his hands on the table, fingers interlocked. "This isn't about hating cops. This is about holding power accountable. About understanding how quickly assumptions can turn dangerous. About how easy it is to devalue someone when you've already made up your mind." He told the story without anger, but without softening the truth. He spoke about fear, not his, but the kind law enforcement carries, and how that fear often gets projected in the wrong direction. "I wasn't hurt that day," he said, "but something else was. Something we don't always talk about. Dignity." The video spread faster than anyone expected, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Men and women who never knew his name watched and felt like they did. Young black teens shared it with their parents. Veterans forwarded it to their precincts. Police departments, some reluctantly, used it in training sessions. Braxton's words weren't just a reflection of the past. They were a challenge to the present. In the weeks that followed, several counties across Virginia and beyond instituted new checks in their police training programs. Not all were permanent. Not all were perfect. But things moved. Conversations that used to fizzle out stuck around longer. More people started to ask the right questions. Not just what happened, but why. And what can we do to keep it from happening again? Rayburn resigned quietly that fall. He took a job with a local non-profit that focused on reintegration support for formerly incarcerated veterans. He never forgot what Braxton said about choices. Tressler fought the disciplinary action, then lost. He was removed from duty but didn't go quietly. Still, even in protest, he couldn't scrub his name from the public record. The footage was out there, so were the consequences. As for Braxton, he returned to what he loved most: mentorship. He began meeting with young officers in training. He told them stories, the real kind, the ones that don't get printed in textbooks or talked about during roll call. "I'm not here to train you to shoot," he'd tell them. "I'm here to train you to see." In his final message to the public, posted 6 months after the incident, he said this: "Change doesn't come from outrage alone. It comes from accountability, from memory, from deciding that your silence is no longer harmless. If you wear a badge, wear it knowing the weight it carries. And if you see someone being reduced to something they're not, don't look away." He paused, then gave a small nod. And if you believe that respect shouldn't have to be earned through trauma, I ask you to do one thing. Speak. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. That video became his legacy. Not the medals, not the rank. Just a man asking his country to look in the mirror. If you've stayed with this story, ask yourself, what would you have done in Officer Rayburn's place? What would you have seen in General Braxton's face? Let's not wait for another story to ask those questions again. Subscribe for more real stories that challenge us to grow, reflect, and do better together.